I think you know that our portfolio just doesn't cover cure. We now have 3 areas that we work in, and what I thought I'd do is just highlight a couple of what I think are exciting research updates in each one of those. The objective in the treat portfolio is really about better treatments. And I think everyone in this room that's been associated with JDRF know that sitting in the treat portfolio is the Artificial Pancreas Project. It is the flagship of JDRF. And why is that? Because it's a near-term solution. We think it's a project that actually could improve people's lives if they're one of the people that choose to use this new technology. When we talk about the artificial pancreas, some people get confused about what is the artificial pancreas. And when I go to the field and talk about it, I said, well, I can tell you that the artificial pancreas, there's some aspect that's of the research that we're doing on that side of the portfolio that will apply to everybody. And so I always do what I call unpacking of the artificial pancreas. So remember, I used to be the project lead of this project, and so I'd probably talk more about it than I should. But the bottom line is, for us to achieve a truly artificial pancreas, which means a device that monitors your glucose levels, gives you insulin at appropriate times, and you don't have to think about it anymore, that's the artificial pancreas in its totality. But along the way, if you unpack the artificial pancreas, we are investing in better insulins. Why? Because the insulin today literally can't keep up to your normal physiology. You're eating, the insulin lags behind. So, as part of the artificial pancreas, we are investing in new insulins that are faster acting. There isn't anybody who has type 1 diabetes that will not benefit from what the investment we've made on the artificial pancreas, because if we get better insulins, everyone with type 1 diabetes will benefit. So number 1, insulins. We have a whole program in better insulins. Number 2, pump technology. Pumps are okay. Are they perfect? They're not perfect. So we're also investing not only in better pumps, but we're investing in dual chamber pumps. Dual chamber pumps down the road could be where you could literally deliver 2 hormones to a person. So anybody who's a pumper is going to, whether they want an artificial pancreas or not, if you're a pumper, better pumps will benefit those people that are using pumps. Sensors. We know for a fact that one of the challenges and barriers to fully realizing a closed-loop artificial pancreas is going to be the sensing technology. About, I would say 6 months, I guess it was last June, if you were all watching the press releases, we announced a new initiative. I think all of you know we've been working very hard with the regulators to actually get what we call clinical guidance, to get an artificial pancreas through what we call the regulatory hurdles. When I took over the program of the artificial pancreas, the biggest challenge to us was, and we started meeting with the FDA, and we'd sit in these rooms with them, and we just couldn't get anywhere with them. And one day, I said to them, look it, you guys, we need some clinical guidelines of how in the world we're going to test an artificial pancreas. You've given us nothing. We don't know, so it's a free-for-all. We could do all this clinical work, spend all this money, invest all this money, all JDRF's money, and get nothing, because you're not telling us what is going to be acceptable for us to test in humans. And there is a head of the artificial pancreas regulatory team down in Washington. He says to me, Darlene, you're not going to see clinical guidance for about 5 years. And I looked him dead in the eye and I said, I don't think so. 5 years is way too long. We walked out of that wonderfully warm meeting that we had with them that day. I assembled the team, and I'm trained in the regulatory science, and I said, you know what, we're not waiting for the FDA to write these clinical guidance. We're going to write them ourselves. And I think the team went, what? we're going to go write them. So we did. We got 10 extremely well-recognized clinicians. I brought them to Washington. We met 2 days in a row. We sat them in a room. We closed the blinds. We closed the door. And we wrote those clinical guidance. And to be honest, they were amazing clinical guidance. And we said, we're going to present it back to the FDA. And that's exactly what we did. We emailed it to them first and said, we're coming to see you. And so it was actually a great day at the FDA. I can tell you, we go there a lot and it's not a great day. It's very contentious. We don't think they're moving as fast and with a sense of urgency that we'd like them. Their job is human safety. We think they err on a highly conservative side of human safety, as they should. We take it seriously, but we walked into the room. They had our clinical guidance in their hand, and the head of the team down there. We all sat around the room, as we usually did, them on one side, us on the other side, and the head goes, I have to say this, no patient organization has ever done such a thing. And they go, and not only, it's pretty damn good. And I'm like, hey, we did your work. We did it in like 3 months flat. And to be honest, I think you all saw the press release. They actually posted clinical guidance, and they utilized our document to write the clinical guidance. It has been out for public review, and on March 5th, they'll be taking all the public comments that went out, and we'll actually have a clinical guidance. What does that mean? A clinical guidance for us means they're telling us what it's going to take to be able to test this artificial pancreas in humans. So we have a pathway, and hopefully if you achieve the actual clinical work they want, you'll be successful. So huge advocacy effort on behalf of JDRF, just a huge, huge win. Something that I think most people don't know what happened behind the scenes and how we ended up with this clinical guidance. So I'm very proud of JDRF for making that move to take the bold move and actually write a clinical guidance. It's a big deal. And I think even the team was like, I don't think we can do this, but we did. So you all may not know, but at JDRF we actually have a regulatory scientist that we hired that works with us on the artificial pancreas. So she spends each and every day just working the regulators for us. In January, we decided with our new program on cure encapsulation, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute, we actually hired what I call a drug regulatory specialist for the drug side of the portfolio. So we now have 2 full-time regulatory specialists that work in Washington, in our Washington office, that are going to be working the regulators for us on a daily basis. So let's see, that's APP. So when you unpack the artificial pancreas, one of the other deals we did when I first joined, 4 months after I joined, we did what's called the Beck and Dickinson deal. And I could tell you we got a lot of blowback because we put $4.5 million down on the table. We made a deal with a company that had never been in the diabetes space. And it may seem simple to people, and I can tell you there were some volunteers very unhappy about this, but the infusion sets for pumpers are not great. Matter of fact, if you saw the data on these infusion sets and how, to me, how antiquated and how awful they are. If I had a child that had to insert these things, we're like, really? So we decided to invest in this company, and we invested in Beck and Dickinson because if you know anything about them, they're very versed in needle technology. And if you look at these infusion sets, you're like, really? I would never put that in a child. What we wanted was to come up with better needles, better insertion, less inflammation, and also less kinking in your tubing. So, you know, for all of you any of you that pump or have your children are pumping, you know that those tubes can kink. That means they're not getting their insulin that they think they're supposed to be getting. So we put on the table the money. We asked them to invest. We asked them for microneedles, much smaller insertions so that small children could end up using pumps if parents want them to. And this is a real success story because it wasn't highly, I guess it wasn't highly received by the JDRF community. They couldn't understand why we were investing in such a thing. But I'll tell you why it's exciting. They were able to develop microneedle technology, little tiny needles that literally will insert pain-free. They've been able to develop much better tubing so that your tubing sets won't be kinking. We should have less inflammation. It's a win-win. And the bottom line is that hopefully a year from now, they'll be able to get approval by the regulatory agencies to be using these infusion sets. But the story doesn't end there. So we started this relationship with Beck & Dickinson over better infusion sets and microneedles. But the real win for JDRF is the fact that this has been a tremendous partnership. As I told you, we sit on the governance of this company, and we've actually got them to get in the type 1 diabetes space. So before, they weren't in type 1 at all. Now they realize that this is something that could be absolutely a very good area to work in, and they're now working in sensor technology. So win, win, win. If we hadn't been in front of them, if we hadn't done the infusion sets and really believed this would have patient value, you wouldn't have a big player who has lots of money, of which we can actually leverage in the game, and now they're working on new sensor technology. So we are so excited. They've been a great partner of ours. We will continue to partner with them. And you know, I just want to tell everybody, we put $4.5 million in the game. These people have invested so much money on these new infusion sets. So we've leveraged our money 10, 20-fold. So we gave them a little bit, we spurred them in the game, and now they're a really good player. And hopefully they'll also develop new sensor technology for us. So I just wanted to share that's a win for JDRF. The second flagship, I believe, should be at JDRF, because I think it could have potentially near-term patient outcome, is what we call the encapsulation program. So we talked about the artificial pancreas, but let's talk about a molecular pancreas. So that's what I call this program. The concept goes as such. You find a cell source. The cell source is cells that will secrete insulin and actually act like a pancreatic cell. So in other words, it can sense glucose, it can deliver insulin on demand. Could we take that cell source, put it in a bubble, surround it with something that allows the cells to stay viable, keep living, get nutrients, but literally work as a molecular pancreas? And can we take that bubble that has the cells, and can we insert it in underneath your skin, and it actually act like a molecular pancreas? I believe we can. And I believe the technology now is present to do so. So what you need to do is you need to study the cell types you want to use. They could come from human source, they could come from a pig source. You need to study them, and you need to be really sure about what your cell source is going to be. You need a whole team of engineers on this, because you're going to encapsulate those cells in a bubble or a device that actually is permeable to nutrients and keeping the cells alive if it's inserted in your forearm under the skin, yet doesn't allow the immune attack, which we believe is present in type 1, from destroying the cells. So you got to come up with a encapsulated source that lets nutrients come in and the cells stay viable where the immune attack cannot come in. We're calling this encapsulation. That's the program. I think now, 10 years ago, there were some JDRF volunteers that spent a considerable amount of money trying to get this molecular pancreas. I tell these volunteers we weren't ready yet. The science had not progressed enough to do it. I believe today the science is there. It's challenging, but I think it can be done. There's already pilot demonstration this can be done in animals. Now we need to take it into humans. You will have probably seen in press releases, there are only 3 companies that are in this kind of game. There's Betalogics, there's ViaCyte, and unfortunately Geron. Just before we did the deal with ViaCyte in January and announced that we just invested in this company to do exactly what I just described, Geron decided to get out of the business. Why is that disturbing? Because you want as many companies in the game trying to develop this kind of technology. Those 3 companies all were taking different approaches. So for me, it was very disconcerting that Geron said we're out. Now, we had not invested with them, so you know, they owe us nothing. But what we're trying to do with them right now is act as a marriage broker. I've actually identified a boutique pharmaceutical company that has high interest in this technology. And what I'd like to do is marry them with Geron, get all that technology away from them, and try to do another type of development for us. So JDRF also acts as a broker, trying to make sure that we're still trying to accelerate the research. So ViaCyte is a small company that we invested in. They've been working on encapsulation technology for quite some time. They need our money or they'll get out because it's challenging. They're a small company. They've been really trying to do this technology for quite some time. I think they're almost there. So JDRF has invested $3 million. I think it's going to be money well spent to see if we can get them to the next hurdle, which is really they're going to be banging up against the regulatory door asking to get into humans. So we've seeded that company to keep them going. We put in $3 million, they put in $12 million, and we're going to see if they can realize this encapsulated cell source. If they can, I would say that should be realized probably by 2017. Now, some of you may say, wow, that's a long ways away, but it will be transformational. It will be amazing. And I think one of the challenges that we're really pushing with the companies that are in this game is, how long will this encapsulated cell source last? Right now, there's been some trials in animals, and these encapsulated cell sources can last up to 8 months. We don't believe that's long enough. We believe that for patients to have true value, they've got to get these cells to survive for up to a year. And we also want it to be simply inserted. So can it be inserted like just under the skin? Maybe on the stomach, in the arm, whatever. It's got to be a simple surgery, easy replacement, and it's got to be viable for a period of time. I mean, there's not a patient out there that's going to want to go to a doctor's office and have this thing inserted every month. So they do have some challenges. They're working on them, but I mean, there is definitely some hope there with this new technology sitting on the cure side of the portfolio. The other piece on the cure side that I think I'd like to just speak briefly to is, so that's all good. We're working on the molecular pancreas, but the other thing is, should we absolutely be able to connect the dots on finding the cure? We definitely want to be able to restore normal beta cell function in people that have had long-standing type 1 diabetes. We have what's called the regeneration portfolio ran by Dr. Pat Killian. She is an amazing scientist. She has lined up a regeneration program to try to learn how to regenerate a beta cell like you would not believe. And I think under her leadership, soon, and this year you've seen several press releases where now we know you can take certain cells of the pancreas and turn them into a beta cell that has functionality. You can take other cell types and turn them into a beta cell. So there's been tremendous scientific inroads in the area of regeneration. And I have to say it's because we have an amazing scientist working for us that has been driving regeneration to see if we can regenerate beta cells. So a phenomenal job by that team, and I think this year is proof that we're making inroads in how to regenerate beta cells that have been lost due to type 1 diabetes. Prevention is a relatively new part of the portfolio. It only encompasses about 10% of the spend on the portfolio. That is run by our Chief Scientific Officer. I laugh every day. Dick Ensel is the Chief Scientific Officer for JDRF. He is a visionary. He is the smartest, most versed scientist I've ever met, and he knows type 1 diabetes like no one else. And so JDRF should be very proud to have this man as their Chief Scientific Officer. If you haven't met him and he comes your way, reach out and meet this man. He was a pediatrician, so he's a physician. He's a trained physician, but he's truly a visionary. And I think his leadership on the science side is going to pay off for JDRF. So he runs the prevention portfolio. I'm going to talk about one particular project that we just initiated this year. It's called the microbiome. There's been some new data that would suggest, and it's published data, that there's a different footprint or signature of people that have been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes versus people that don't have type 1 diabetes in the intestinal gut. So in other words, the bacteria that resides in the GI tract or the gastrointestinal system of your body looks very, very different in their bacterial makeup. And actually tomorrow I'm going to show slides to show you what that looks like. The details don't matter. What it tells you is and I don't know if you know this, you may not, that bacteria actually have triggers to the immune system. So the hypothesis is, on what we call the microbiome project, is it possible in type 1 patients that end up being, that actually convert to type 1, is it that their intestinal flora, the makeup of their bacteria that's in the intestine, could it be that it's different than normal patients? And is that what triggers type 1 diabetes? If we can understand that, and if it's true, then we could come up with a prevention strategy. We could actually change that intestinal flora to prevent onset of type 1 diabetes. So this is a new program. Interesting enough, about 2 weeks ago in the national office in New York, we are not the only ones that are interested in the makeup of this, what we call the microbiome within your GI tract for type 1. There are other autoimmune diseases that believe, too, this is associated. So we brought together all the autoimmune foundations. We brought them to JDRF 2 weeks ago in the office. We spent a whole day all talking about how we think this is associated with the trigger for type 1 diabetes. And they're looking at it from autoimmune disease in general. And we believe we can leverage each other in this field. Because if it is about autoimmunity and there's something there, it could translate across disease states. So watch for new and exciting things coming out on the microbiome. We're putting together what we call a consortium of leading experts in this area. JDRF will be leading that consortium. And we're going to actually see if we can generate more and more compelling scientific information around, is the microbiome responsible? Is the changes in the composition of gut bacteria triggering type 1 diabetes? If it is, we can identify what it is that it's triggering, and we can come up with a prevention strategy. Wouldn't that be amazing if we could prevent the disease? It would be amazing. So that's the other part. It is being run by Dick Ensel right now. I tease him. I tell him he's my AVP of prevention. He's the right guy to be leading it. We're going to bring another scientist over to that side of the portfolio because I think there's enough to be done there that we can do that. So the bottom line is, to leave you, I've given you some flavor about what's going on in the research department. I talked on the cure side about encapsulation, and I think that's very exciting. I think the science is ripe to be actually successful in that area, so that's the molecular pancreas. I talked to you about being the movement and the science on the regeneration part. That sits on the cure portfolio as well. So if we come up with a cure, we'll be able to regenerate your own beta cells. Wouldn't that be amazing? And so that you can become fully functional again. I think we've made really great scientific progress there. On the treat side, the artificial pancreas is moving along nicely. We've got some challenges. We need some better sensors. We need better human form factor, which means we need to miniaturize that artificial pancreas. So it's reasonable for all folks that want to use it. So we're working on that. So artificial pancreas is critically important. On the treat side, the other thing that you may be interested, we're going to start kicking off some clinical trial work in the established. There's a couple of drugs out there that I think we should reposition and try it in type 1. So over the next couple of months, you're probably going to hear and see some press releases coming out in New York. We're going to try to get engaged in a couple of clinical trials. We're going to reposition drugs that have been used in other diseases, and we're going to see if they're going to be effective in type 1 as far as glucose control. That is something that we've made a commitment to the CEO that we're going to take these clinical trials on. I should note to you that when you get in the game of translational medicine, it's very expensive. So when you see the price tags on these clinical trials, they're big, and chances are we're going to fail. But as I tell the team, you don't know until you try. So you're all going to swallow, because you're going to see us do an $8 million clinical trial, and it may not be successful, but if we don't try, we won't know if there's a therapy. So big ticket items, we're going to have to fundraise around that, there's no doubt about it, but we got to take those shots on goal, because nobody else is going to do it for you. You know, type 1 is not, you know, a commercially viable area, so if JDRF doesn't invest, it's not, these drugs will never get tested in type 1. And then prevention, I talked about the microbiome. So I think those are all top-level programs that are really exciting in the research department. So I think with that, I think I've given you a little bit of flavor about what's going on in the research department. I hope not too much granularity.